Hi everyone, this is Andy from Mostos LA. I'm introducing your configuration for DynoFoliage. We're going to be reviewing a project that I created to work with Twin Blast and really just about any other characters, and with a custom asset that we will show you how it's set up. This big 3 here is not part of the assets that come with DynoFoliage. It is part of a custom asset I literally just made off of the environment map. You can pick out the other view of the Infinity Blade Icelands. It's this green tree right here. We're gonna need to know where that's at, so I'm actually going here into the details panel, clicking find, and it brings me right to the mesh. I'm going to right click and copy that name, and might as well also, well, we'll get to it. We might need to go back to it anyway. But keep in mind that I copy pasted or copied that so that I can paste it. We'll need that. Okay. Let us go back to the default level and have a look at what we have here to deal with. So the first things that I would like to show is the custom collision channels and how they work. So this project has been set up with the custom collision channels, and to get to those you'll go to project settings. Once that pops up, you'll scroll down here and find collision right there, and as you can see you have channels here. To create one, you just click new channel, you type in the channel, you set the default to ignore, and you create accept. You click upset to create it, and that's your channel. Then for each channel you need to configure a preset and modify what that preset is set to. So let us go over the presets I have created so you can copy them over to yours. I have one for the dynamic foliage. This is the foliage that moves. It is a skeletal mesh basically. As you can see, it's completely set to ignore except for the pawn, the physics body, and the vehicle. And I have the destructible set to block. This is a particular case for the destructible. The demo package uses destructible as one of the channels because I didn't bother setting up channels in the test project since they will overwrite your configuration and cause problems. Then we have a replaceable foliage channel. You can see that this is set to query only, replaceable foliage, and it is set to ignore everything and just cause overlaps for the replaceable foliage. So it will overlap on itself. Replaceable area. This is the area around the item that has been replaced. What will cause it to go back to normal? So everything that overlaps, and again this is query only, replaceable area as the object type. Everything that overlaps it will cause the item to possibly revert back to what it is. So we want to check the pawn and we want to check the destructible objects that are flying around. We might also want to check the physics body and the vehicle. That depends on your project. It is important that it does not collide with itself, so make double sure that your replace area is set to ignore. You may just crash your engine if you don't. Then we have a look at pawn. Pawn is the default channel used by the character, and we're going to break down the character because the character meshes are kind of particular. They have actually 2 pawn channels, which is how I'm getting by with walking through things and then stopping them later with another collision. So for this one, you can see that most of them are set to block. The collision type, the object type is obviously, this is all preset for you, so you shouldn't have to touch those. Just change the ticks for the ones that you added. So dynamic foliage will be blocked, replaceable is set to ignore, and replace area is set to overlap. Then we have the destructible one because that one as well is in the project, and we just copy the settings of the other one onto this. And really those settings should also go for any other channel that you want it to cause the foliage to remove basically, or interact. Okay, so those are the collision channels. Now I'm gonna leave this open and put it to the side so that we can walk through it with other things. So those are foliage brushes. If you're not familiar with the foliage system, you probably shouldn't have bought this add-on, since it actually works with that specifically. So this is a custom instance. If I paint that custom instance of the foliage in there, it will replace and animate when I walk over it, as you can see here. Alright, so now that that's explained and the foliage brushes are explained, let's go into one of those foliage brushes and show where the settings for the collision are. I'm going to make this panel just a little smidge longer and come down to where the collision is. As you can see, the collision preset has been set to replaceable foliage within those foliage types. And you might need to tweak this, or not tweak, what I mean is set something else and set it back to replaceable foliage as you are creating your assets to get it to take effect. Usually you play, you stop, you play, and then it starts working just fine. So then this is for that asset. Now let's have a look at the tree, and to do the tree we're just going to delete this tree, put in the static mesh, and show you what happens when you have a static mesh. Also open up the static mesh and show you how that looks. So this is the mesh that comes from the level as I showed you, right? It's got two materials on it, which to me that is a red flag, by the way, in terms of performance. Should really just be merged, but it is whatever I found, so I used whatever was there. This is the physics asset, so I created the bone skeleton for it and weight painted it, which takes a little bit, and this weight paint is no good, it's just a sample. And if I click on simulate, you'll see the tree fall and fall apart, and that is perfectly normal. It's kind of like a ragdoll. If you click on here and you change this to kinematic, this will actually stop into place, and this is probably how you should be testing. I am shift right clicking with simulate on, or shift clicking but only on some of them, because it depends on how much the items weigh and how much strength you have put into the constraints, which we're going to go over in a minute. Alright, so the next thing is the collision itself. Let me change this back to simulated, move forward. This one here, okay, so I'm setting the mass in kilograms manually. I like doing that because it more or less reflects how a real tree would snap if you keep doing it. This one, for testing purposes, has weird limits and weird information on it, so it's not, that is why it's bouncy. We are going to click on limited to limit the asset mobility, and I usually remove soft constraints like this and change this restitution value to 1 so that it snaps back. On top of it, I also add the twist and swing by clicking those two after changing that, and I add a value to it. We can actually preview what happens if you change this real quick, so I'm going to make it 10, simulate, and you'll see that that just kind of slurps over. You'll see it better when I set that to kinematic, of course. And so what you want to do is that is falling over because of the weight that you have on those combined. So what you do is you go into the constraint and you start messing with the value here until you find something that you're happy with. So 10 slurps or falls down. Let's do 150. Let's do, I don't even know. Let's do 100 and see what happens. See, more or less this stays in place. So maybe 150 is also enough, counter to the 500 I had before. And perhaps now clicking it might even work. But see how that is. So the more up you go, the more this changes. And I'm going to just leave it at that and click it once to drag it down, let it go, and you can see how much faster and how much more like a branch that actually looks, especially a big branch like this one. Now the weight paint is horrible, as I said, so That is why you're getting all this tearing here. If you do a better job on your meshes, then obviously they won't do that. That's it for this asset. Save it here just in case. Change this back to simulated yet again and move forward. Okay, so the skeletal tree here, this one is the real thing. So let's move the skeletal tree in, and then we're going to go walk into it. And as you can see, I might have already done it here even, since it's blocking me. But this one will do just about the same. So as you can see, it's blocking me, and that is kind of what happens when you have a and it wasn't selecting because of foliage mode. That is kind of what is expected to happen. This is currently not set to simulate physics, and therefore your static mesh won't work. It will be like a static mesh, so you get a performance loss for nothing. So I want to enable simulate physics. Now when I do that, you will see that the tree will probably just start falling over and doing all sorts of weird things. There you go. Alright, so yeah, that may look great if you're trying to actually do that. I don't know. It might even start walking on its own because of the angular motors, depending on how it falls. So we're gonna lock this in place. To lock that in place, just click X, Y, Z's on the constraints, and this will root it down just like a tree. And there you go. So we are interacting with it. Now though, you can see that I cannot walk through it, and that the character tends to get pushed around by said foliage. So that is because of the collision channel that is currently on. And to explain this, the best example that I can give is to look at the third-person blueprint of the character. Coming right up. So on the character, we actually have a capsule component. The capsule component has a collision preset of pawn. Okay, and you can take a look at those values and review it. It's also the ones that we changed earlier in the defaults of the collision channels. So, and then if you go into the mesh, you'll find that this one has its own set of collision. It's called, the preset is called character mesh, and it works a little differently because it cannot collide with the pawn, but it is an object of type pawn, so the pawn will still respond and be blocked as well. Except for this one also blocks physics bodies, which is how we're actually getting everything to work. So the character walking through it will get the character to walk through it, and the mesh on the character will be the one that's actually pushing around things rather than the capsule. Okay, so to do that right now, because you probably configured it, we can just swap this to dynamic foliage. And we can also look at those again to show you that the pawn is set to overlap. That means that it can go through. Physics is set to overlap, and everything else is set to overlap. But remember what we just said. Within the third-person blueprint, the character mesh preset is not letting the physics body overlap. So when I walk through this now, I'll be able to walk through it, but I should also interact with it somewhat. I don't see any movement as of right now. Perhaps it did not take. Oh, right. Generate hit events, generate overlaps. And there you have it. So I'm able to walk through the tree, and this is good for any foliage, because you don't want it to fight your capsule. Okay, so then with that done and the preset in place and tree set up as it is, what you do usually is you just create a blueprint, which will make a blueprint of skeletal mesh type. So we'll just call this BP normally, and instead of saving it or creating it, I will bring up the one that I already have created and replace it to this one. And I will also open this one up and show you what changes happened after it was created. From the viewport, the construction script and everything is actually empty, just like it gets created. There is no magic there. And you can see that that's the mesh. If you click on the mesh, you'll see that the settings for it are exactly the same as we just configured. And the collision preset is set to dynamic foliage. If you pop that down, it will be the same settings, obviously. So then you have these two things. The first one I'm going to explain is the disc capsule. So it is a tree, and it is not supposed to let people walk through the trunk. Therefore, I add a custom collision capsule to the trunk that prevents that from happening. And it does though pretty well because it is on a different channel. Let's have a look at that channel real quick. I have set it on a custom channel to block the pawn. And you can do this, or you can use one of the pre-made channels. Should also note that it's reacted to world static. That may or may not be important. It depends on how you want to configure things. Maybe you want to create a custom collision channel that's called tree, and that it tells the character you're hitting a tree. So that's up to you. Going back to here, the other piece of the puzzle is the child actor that I deleted from it. So we're going to add that back and show you how that is configured. So this is within the DynoFoliage folder, you will grab the BPC Foliage Manager and just drag it into associate with the skeletal mesh though, make sure. So you just drag it into the component section, compile, and that's already fine. But I also want to overwrite this actor's data, basically the default that it gets created with. So normally you will find this closed and you'll be looking at this and you'll be like, what, where are the settings? You just pop this down, you pop default down, and you have all the settings over here. So for this tree, it's a tree, it's pretty big. I'll set 800 as the sphere radius that it operates on, and because it's lopsided, I'm going to actually move that component and kind of center in the viewport like that. And now if I compile and save and run into that tree, I'm going to cause the editor to bug and complain that it doesn't know what to swap back to when I get to here. So technically, there you go. Because I'm using that blueprint, but it's not coming in from where it's supposed to be, it's not swapping at real time, it will always throw that error. So that's expected. That is how the blueprint is configured. Now let's go through how to put the tree back. If I go back here to that, we have the foliage brush. If I have the foliage brush, on the foliage brush I have this little lens that I just clicked. Where'd it go? Panel disappeared. So you click the lens here, it will take you to whatever it is. In this case is that mesh, and we'll take that, and you won't have that brush maybe, but what you do to create a brush is you just click and drag this to the foliage type if you don't know, and then from here you can save the foliage asset, and that's how I get this file. And then from this file you can set a few things maybe in it, like let's say the replaceable foliage, right, collision preset, or maybe the radius that it spawns in, even though I think the radius is available under here rather than over there. Yeah, it's under the painting option, so you get those after you put it inside the panel. So with that foliage brush added to the project, you will be then able to select it. Select this one, and I'm going to just do it in single instance mode rather than paint a whole lot of them, and I'm just going to paint it right there. Now if I want to rotate it, so I'll just select it, click it, go with R or one of the buttons up here to change it to that, and the button was E, and rotate it back around to kind of where I had it before. Click play, and everything is back to working again. Perfect. Now, yes, if you jump over, if you manage to jump over, because Twin Blast apparently can't jump. Yeah, if you manage to jump over it, yeah, the collision will, you know, basically bug out, because if you look at the blueprint, it is short, and it does not go or conform to the trunk. All right. So keep that in mind, that maybe you want this to go up higher, prevent the character from going there, or create more. All up to you. The other thing that we need to look at within this asset, actually, so let me bring up the asset, and what I did for it was to change the default simple collision. To change the default simple collision, you need this convex decomposition panel. Because it's the quickest thing. Instead of creating a custom collision and everything, you'll bring it up from here, click on convex decomposition, and it will pop this up if it's not already up. You set how many hulls you want. So let's say maybe I want 6 hulls, how many vertices max per hull, and what type of precision, which, you know, the defaults really just work usually. And as you can see now, it created a hole basically that you could technically walk through, but obviously this doesn't matter. You could even have it be a giant square, because the system will be replacing this foliage out. However, it is important to note that should it fail to replace, you probably, and if your collision channels are not set correctly, you probably want them to be a little more accurate collision wise. Okay, so let's have a look at show collision and explain that portion of it. As you can see, there are red spheres when the foliage is swapped, and those red spheres are the ones that I showed you how to define on a blueprint instance a second ago. Alright, so the pawn moving in and out of those is what triggers the replacement system. Now that is on the other custom collision channel. So to set that up, you will need to go into the actual DynoFoliage manager component that I created, and click on the sphere, and within the sphere you will be setting the collision channel for it, the preset to replace area, the preset that we created. No, you do not need simulate physics on this, but yes, you do want to generate hit and overlaps just in case. The collision channel takes care of either ignoring the physics or doing something with that. And that is how you move in and out of objects. Okay, with that done, we should take a look at, well, a couple of things I want to look at before calling it, calling this video over. The first one being the demo level. Let me not save that. Go back to whatever I had. Okay, so click on play on the demo level right now with Twin Blast, and because Twin Blast doesn't have the interaction on the blueprint, I have removed, and that is the weirdest physics you'll ever see up there. Those balls are set to simulate physics, but apparently it is a very stable environment, and a round object on top of a round object cannot be moved. So that is one of those balls that I brought down on the floor just for demonstration purposes. Okay, so the ones that are up here, however, they are instances of the same blueprint. So I modified, what I did is I modified this blueprint, and I can show you this blueprint because it matches the one that you would generate yourself. There is nothing in them. There is just the sphere. The sphere has a collision, and I chose the destructible channel for it back when I created it for the other project. So then I'm making it work with the dynamic foliage right there. And like I said before, make sure that the collision for the dynamic, for the, what is this? For the destructible has as dynamic foliage tick to block. Then you have the replace foliage channel, and we will go over how to add the tree that is not in here, for instance, to this element right here. Okay, so the first thing that you'll need to know is that you need to replace the replaceable foliage flag over here. By default it will be in world. Now that being in world static means that, and I can show you this on yet another level, the Infinity Blades level, just because it's there. Once that loads up, and if we go back to Twin Blast as well, don't save. Something about vertex paint. Okay, so within Twin Blast, so to get to Twin Blast, actually I'm just going to open the game mode, and because the game mode has Twin Blast as the character, I can just click the find button to bring me to him. And within Twin Blast I have this replaceable foliage, just like the one that we were looking at for the test ball. And this is set to replaceable foliage. By default it will be set to default static, to world static. And let's enable the debug view for one frame and show you what will happen when you test run a level, so that you understand why that needs to be changed and why custom collision channels are best for you. Apparently this was not set up to test, which is great. That's how you get Twin Blast to go. As you can see, everywhere I walk, I'm getting a collision response of some sort. And this can be a good thing. Technically, you can use it to replace anything that you're touching to a blueprint. In reality, it's supposed to only work with the other system, with the landscape system for now. So if we change this back to what it is supposed to be, replaceable foliage that we're looking for in the level, and we hit play, that sphere will always be red, and it will also be red when you touch replaceable foliage, because it is instantly replaced as soon as you touch it. So since I'm in here and I have this running, and this is on a somewhat optimized level, right, coming straight from Epic, so stat unit and stat unit graph. Okay, and then I'm going to pause this and go into the foliage and drag back my foliage brush in here from the same set of stuff. So with that one there, I'm going to paint a few instances around in single instance mode. Let's say one here, yeah, just make it kind of heavy so that we kind of bug the game out on purpose to try and see how bad performance can get depending with this big 3, because remember I did change that. And then we're going to add the other foliages. You'll find those under geometry foliage right here. Just select them both, drag them to the foliage type, click on them like that. As I said earlier, maybe set the radius if it's not already set to something. And then I'll remove single instance mode, and whatever the settings for it are, I'm going to just lay it thick on the level, and for 100 instances, those are not going to do much. It is a close enough space that this will affect things though, so there's going to be a lot of skeletal meshes coming up and about in a second. I'm going to click play so that we are here, and then I'm going to show collisions so that we're already bugging the FPS down a lot. I'm just running through the level now. At this point, all of the instances that you see are replacing to dynamic, but you can notice that my FPS is staying pretty steady. And the settings I chose for the replacement are fairly immediate, and therefore things get changed back out quick. And you don't suffer much of a loss in FPS, despite everything that's happening, despite all the stuff that's on the level. Alright, so I wanted to show that, and woo, this material here must be heavy. It's always fun to find the spikes. But yeah, I mean, between all the skeletal meshes going on, the dynamics, the physics, yeah, on this tiny computer with a 1060, I expected much worse. Alright, so with that shown, let's go into the last piece, which is how to customize the character. Maybe we did that already, but I just wanted to show that the component, so this is Twin Blast, okay, this is his sheet. There's nothing of import there because it's just whatever you get. There is no magic going on. The component here is the magic. By default, the sphere radius should be 150. It might be 0. Just change it. 150 is a good range at which to change things. You can play with that value, fine-tune your performance, maybe figure out why there's something spiking it when I'm not really doing anything within the level. That is very interesting. So let's disable the debug view right now and go into how to add D. So let's remove and add the tree. So this is the tree right here. I'm going to can I delete it that way? No, I can delete all of it though. Okay, so if I delete all of it and I return it to the default, it will have just the two that are pre-configured. Okay, so now that the tree has been removed, I can go up to the tree and the tree will not change. Though the collision being how I have it set up, the tree should not block me or have a collision on its trunk. So that is what I meant earlier with how you need to play with things and be a little careful of what you do. So let's add that back in here, okay? For ease of use, first of all, let's click the add element to add the element. And then you'll have element 1, element 0. I clicked that on the wrong thing, by the way. There should be a way to delete that without having to delete the whole thing. There it is. Alright, click the plus on the right one. Remember how I copy pasted that thing earlier? That's the name of the mesh, and we want to copy paste that in here. We also want that mesh in here. So we can bring that up by going into the Foliage Brush for the tree and clicking on the lens, and it's right here, so I'm just going to click it and drag it. Perfect. And then you need to put your blueprint in there. See? So there you go. BP, that's the one that we created. We'll move it in here, and that's how you configure your custom made foliage into your replacer. Now that is on a per character basis. Obviously, if you edit the actual component, that will change for everything that you make with that component, as long as you reset the value to default. And so you have it here, kind of working, twerking, doing its thing. And that pretty much concludes everything I wanted to show about this plugin of note and of import. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoy this plugin.